Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about episode 4 of Shadow and Bone. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's pick up with Kaz and the crew. Obviously, it's like, well, they made it through the fold, but also it's like, well, how do we get into the little palace? Well, we can't do it without Nina. But then Kaz comes and tells them, it's like, hey, there is a map, but it's locked up, but hey, the fact of the matter is, it's away from prying eyes and the masses. And then Jasper's so happy. He's like, yeah. And then the conductor's like, what are you so happy about? He's like, it means it's time for a heist. He's super hyped about it. So, and at first I was like, oh man, I don't think this is going to go as well as they planned. And it kind of does. But then I was like, it's got to fall apart at some point in time. But it's actually an interesting plan. Kaz coming in pretending to be like this artist, being like, oh, I got to design something that needs to get through the door frame of the little palace, so I need to know what the little palace interest looks like. But the dude collects the map every day, so even if they get the map, they can't take it because he'll immediately know it's gone, so they have to copy it. Jasper comes in pretending to be a guard later on because there's also that little interesting thing of Kaz slipping that phosphorus under Home Dude's foot so you can follow the footsteps to where the map is, and obviously you see which drawer he touched so that you can decide follow Inej can sneak in and get the map. But the lights come on and Inej is quiet as a mouse, dude. That whole because you only see that in cartoons where the dude's turning around and she's literally behind him every step of the way. It's like, yo, that's some Assassin's Creed type of stuff, dude, she was pulling off there. But I also love things don't work out because the lights came on too quickly because I guess the guards noticed the lights were off, and so the plan didn't go by foolproof. But what I love is the fact is it's Jesper's there and he kind of times it with just the bell tolling for the clock, and bam, shoots the lock. And I was like, dude, once again, that's so sick. Also, really quickly, I love his little goodbye to Milo. It's like, hey, this barmaid's going to take care of you. This bullet, it's always going to be a reminder of the time we had, and it's just like, I was so sad because literally last episode I was like, oh, I hope we keep that goat around, and immediately the next episode it's like, nope, bye-bye to that goat, which I'm immediately like, how do you know they're going to take care of that goat and not just kill the goat, not goat, Milo, And it's almost just this thing of wow, Jesper, once again, just the jokester that he is, but then immediately, once again, you have the moments of him just being the badass he is. So they managed to sneak away with the map, and it's like, yeah, but sadly, they don't, there's no way in because everything's well guarded, so what are you going to do? And I love the conductor, Kaz gave him a job of yeah, take this money and go make friends. He's like, that's the hardest part, that's the hardest thing to do. And, Kaz is like, well, you did it with us, so you'll manage. And lo and behold, there's that troop there, Star, who does the thing, and it's oh, she falls, and I was like, oh, that's so random. I thought they were kind of setting up oh, you're going to get the troop to be your inside. Turns out it is the case, and because the conductor's like, yeah, their Star had an accident, and it's oh, we find out he set that emotion. I like how they did that reveal. So Inej gets chosen as the new Star replacement, and it's oh my god, you're impressive. And it's obviously you have Jesper being we're a package deal, and it's okay, he showcases his skills by using a mirror, turned around, using a reflection so he can aim, kisses his gun and everything, and shoots a card in Inej's mouth. So it's hey, Kaz, he's get on stage, he's I'll find my own way there. So they're finding their way they found their in to the little palace, so that's really interesting. But what I also thought was kind of another interesting showcase of this episode is kind of the mirror of Mal and Alina this episode. Because for one, we got more insight into the testing, how it works. I was wondering oh, did you have to do something because I was there's no way they went their entire lives never bleeding. It has to be sudden pain. Sudden pain is what draws out your Grisha powers, kind of reveals oh, you're a Grisha. But if you're in pain already, which we kind of find out what that scar on her hand meant, it's by hurting herself, being in pain at the same time, she could, the test kind of shows, oh, you're just normal, you're not Grisha. So, because it turns out that's what the whole oh, Mal was injured thing, why that mattered. Because I was under the impression oh, if you're sick or injured, I was maybe it's because Grisha don't get sick or something. It's no, because if you're sick or injured, that means you're already in pain. They need you to be it needs to be the sudden shock of them pricking you, and you be it has to be unexpected pain. But if you're constantly in pain, there's no way to actually properly test that. So I thought that was an interesting development. on that front, which I'm still wondering if that still applies to Mal or not, because most of the time Mal's got hurt in this episode, at least from what we've seen, he's kind of expected it. So that's why part of me's wondering, is it just straight up, oh, he's not, like, it has to be unexpected pain. Like, later on, you know, that gun's firing, it's like, he sees it coming, so he knows he's kind of expecting it. So it has to be something you're kind of not expecting. Like, that's why it's like and, oh, suddenly, I don't know. Maybe that is still showcasing, like, oh no, he is straight up human. It's just such an interesting mechanic of, like, revealing someone being a Grisha. But nevertheless, like I said, there's just many different avenues going on at once. The fact is that with Mal, obviously she's spending time with Kerrigan, or Alexander as he says, and we kind of obviously learn a little bit more history about the Black Heretic and what this means for Kerrigan, because for him it's like, he's even in a more complicated situation than most Grisha, because we find out, oh, in actuality, your circumstances are, because I was wondering, I was like, you have the very unique ability as a, you know, shadow summoner, so it's like it was like, so you're very unique in that regard. So I was like, are you related to the Black Heretic? Turns out he is. He's a descendant, because like, it's such a unique thing, like, you have to be related to him. And so we kind of learned a little bit more about the Black Heretic circumstances of, like, right, he, like, the king got worried about a coup, and obviously the Black Heretic wanted to basically have enough power to kind of protect his people, just in case, like, you know, they were going to go back to being persecuted again. So he ended up, you know, summoning enough power, and obviously, you know, the king wanted both the Black Heretic dead, but also any Grisha that stood by him. So ultimately, the Black Heretic ended up creating the Fold, trying to, like, defend himself, and they said died in the process. You know, so I wonder, what was it necessarily that killed him? Was it like the Vulcan inside? Was it just like the raw power creating a Fold? Which also is something I didn't talk about last episode. It's like, when you look at that up close, it's like, you realize just how tall and how massive that is. To be fair, once again, it's like, to get around it, you basically have to take a 4-month trip just to go around the Fold, because it's that vast. Which I think speaks volumes about, because they were basically talking about, like, the myth is that basically he wanted to try and gain a way to amplify his powers, very much like the Bonesmith. Now, whether it was the same means or not is a whole other question within itself, but I just thought that was fascinating history. But Kerrigan, like, that's why this is so important to him, because resolving this is a means of potentially, you know, correcting the mistake of his ancestor, because because for him, he's like, he understands Alina's, like, you know, situation, because for him it's like, he used to come to this well that, you know, the Make-A-Wish and everything, just to escape, because he used to wish to be anyone else, because he's kind of a cursed child in his own right. So that was kind of interesting. But later on, we hear something from Kerrigan, Alexander, I thought was kind of interesting. It's like, oh, Fedyor, we haven't heard from Nina. She was on a very important mission for me. I'm like, what's that about? What was that mission? I wonder, was it something related to Alina or something? Because part of my mom was like, you don't think he's going to try and sway Alina's heart by using a heart renderer? It's like, no, man, whatever. That's definitely going to be interesting to find out what the hell that's about. Like, because it's that thing of, like, you want to trust Kerrigan, but there's also that part of you that's like, I don't know, man, you might have some shit, like, not just your ancestor, it might be a thing of that you yourself might just be, like, power hungry, so, like, you're playing the role of, like, the hero, but eventually maybe you might step into the role of the villain, because you're like, oh no, like, I'm tired of, like, the way things have kind of been run, so we Grisha are gonna rise up and, like, run this mother effort, like, type of thing. That's the feeling I get. Like, but once again, I might be holding it against Ben Barnes, just because it's like, right, you were Jigsaw and Punisher, so I expect you to kind of, that reveal of you not being the good guy. You know, maybe it's like, maybe I'm still kind of holding that against him to a certain extent, but it's just like, just his behavior and everything just makes me feel like there's definitely going to be a twist with him, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm curious what the whole Nina thing is, which, speaking of Nina, we get more time with her as that guy is kind of questioning her about her circumstances. It was really interesting, because for him it's like, you know, because obviously the Fjordans don't know anything about the Grisha, so it's like, were both of your parents Grisha? You know, also trying to learn more about the commander, that being Alexander, you know, Kerrigan. And so he's like, I'm offering you food. It's like, oh, like like someone's just trying to be nice to you, good manners and stuff like that. She's like, good manners? You have me chained up and you want to like kill me? Like, yeah. And he's like, all right, fine. Like, and he's trying to pump her for information because they don't know much about how this works. But even the thing is like, oh, you're a heart renderer. The fact of the matter is, oh, you make people's blood boil. She's like, yeah, but I can also calm people, because the thing is like, he's also asking like, oh, like, were you born this way or did you choose it? And it's like, so you guys are hunting us down, wanting us dead, and you know nothing about us. But it is the thing of like, for him, he believes that he's doing the right thing because he believes it. And I think that's also the interesting thing about like, oh, the country he grew up in, they have a strong belief in like, because also like they do refer to them as witches, so it flows into the nature of the whole thing of like burning witches at the stake. It's like, oh, so like, oh, I guess that's how they actually do it. Which is also, I mean, I think that maybe that's supposed to be like a reflection of like, you know, the in real world wise, the witch trials, in particular the Salem witch. So those are like the go-to ones, but there are other ones as well. But the whole thing of like, hey, if you drown, you're not a witch. If you float, you're a witch. You know, it's like, okay, you're kind of dead either way. You know, it's kind of, you know, one of those circumstances. So I just. Yeah, for her, it's like, I'm not going to be a traitor. I'm not going to accept your scraps. And he's like, oh, you will. But then later on when the ship, it's like during the storm and everything, and his commanding officer's like, hey, so when it's all said and done, if need be, let's kill them. I mean, it's like, wait, what? What about the trial and everything? It's like, no, we can't take the chance they might get free. So we're seeing that he is a little sentimental because he, in his mind, did think, he grew up a certain way, so he thought, oh, maybe the trials are fair and everything. It's like, they're going to get it their due day in court. And it's like, even he has to recognize what Nina had said of like, oh, how many Grisha are found innocent? And it's like, yeah, that should be kind of a sign, but now it's him making, you know, and because Nina said, like, to use her powers, she would need her hands free, but now it's also the conversation of, well, is that 100% true, or is it just like, I don't know, part of me is like, if this was part of, I wonder, is this part of Nina's plan? It doesn't seem like it, like what she was kind of sent to do by Kerrigan is kind of my point. It doesn't seem like this is that, it seems like this is just like, oh, unfortunate. So I'm like I said, I'm wondering, does this have something to do with the conductor or something? Like, there's definitely some like sly shit going on that front. Especially when you consider, like, obviously Kerrigan's super pissed about, well, because Nina has a connection to the conductor, and the conductor obviously has a connection to the first commanding officer who's running things in the West, who's trying to do the sovereignty, which, like, Kerrigan is super pissed about, because for him it's like, it's bad enough that the Grisha are kind of being treated the way they are, but the fact of the matter is that there's a Revkin who wants, someone from Ravka who wants to kind of do this, because for him it's like, this is almost like your way of, like, you know, turning kinfolk against kinfolk. He's like, basically, that this is almost like led to the prosecution of like the Grisha in the first place, and for him it's like he's lost so many friends, so many good soldiers he had to bury, and the darkness is swelling around him, and Alina grabs him and fights back the darkness, and he's like, I've been waiting for you, because like she's telling him like, you're not alone. So it's like, you kind of feel, it's like, oh, it might turn into a love triangle situation, because like he's like, I've waited my whole life for you, and she's like, I should go, because it's like, there's definitely a connection there, but it's obviously also, there's the whole her and Mal thing, but the her and Mal thing, it's like, I don't know what we are, you know, because the conversation comes up, you know, when she's at the dinner and everything, and she's talking to her friends, and like, oh, and Mal, oh, you know, when he shows up and everything, like, introduce us and stuff like that. You know, we're your buddies and everything, so we want to be there. But also, we kind of ended up finding out none of Alina's letters have been reaching him, and she doesn't know that. And that's the point, because, you know, they even said it in the past, like, oh, once you become a Grisha, like, you know, you basically cut ties with your past. So I think they're trying to, like, cut off her connection so that, like, either that's part of Bagra's thing, or whether that's Kerrigan's work. It might, hell, for all we know, it might be even Jinya who's kind of doing that. We don't know. But I think that's such an interesting element, because Mal's letters aren't reaching her either. So it has to be like it has to be something in the little palace wise, because they want her to cut her past off, because they want her to be fully invested, feeling like she has no place to go back to, so that this is her home. So granted, there could be other means to that, of like why they're kind of cutting her off for her past, but it seemed like they kind of do that to all Grisha to a certain extent. But obviously Alina's going through her training and everything, and it's not as successful. She's actually, you know, every time she's doing something, Bagra hits her, and it's like, ow, and it's like she's doing it over and over again, and eventually she's able to summon up a little bit for Bagra, but it's like, nope, like, how many people are going to have to be orphaned because you can't do the job you're supposed to do? And obviously it's like, her Bagra got to understanding her a little bit more by being like, oh, like your connection to Mal and everything, you're going to run away. So it's like using Mal, like using other people as a weakness, which is kind of a shame because like people can be your strength. You shouldn't have to isolate yourself. Like people can make you stronger. They can make you better. Like they fill in the gaps of like your own shortcomings. Coming together. Once again, I'm one of those saps that's like, yeah, storylines about the heart and friendship. I'm all about that. I'm sentimental like that and stuff like that. So like I'm more about like, yeah, I play enough video games like Kingdom Hearts. It's all about friendship and the power of friendship and everything like that. So that's and obviously in their case, Mal and Alina, it's a little bit more. But that's where I kind of disagree with Bagra, but I think like the Grisha are kind of raised to be like that. Also, speaking of the Grisha too, we find out about Zoya got like sent to another position because Kerrigan found out about what she did, which had to be heartbreaking considering she's all about him and everything. But the fact is, it's like, she got sent away to reevaluate her priorities. So I was like, also showing like, oh yeah, like Kerrigan ain't about that shit. It's like, no, this is a Sun Summoner. Your childish shit. Get the hell out of here with that. So I thought that was just kind of interesting in its own right. But nevertheless, like I said, I thought the parallels were interesting, like I said, because we're bouncing between Alina's story and Mal's story, and Mal is doing everything he can to get back to her, and to a certain extent, she is too. But obviously, like, her belief in him and her, like, relying on him starts to wane a little bit. Especially, because she starts thinking back to like their relationship. It's like, oh, you described to me to your friends as, oh, your little friend. Then she thinks back to the past of like, it's like, oh, we're supposed to run away together. I guess they never did because he just got scared. And like anytime they were touching hands, like she backed away. Like during that moment they were having in the first episode, he was just like, and kind of like pulls away a little bit, like kind of like, oh, we're just friends, like because it's like, what are we to each other? So it's like we'll just kind of never like I'm just because it's like you put all this stuff like Batgirl is kind of like you're putting all this stuff on him of like, oh, this is what he wants, because it's like you're like, oh, like I had like Mal got bullied, so that's why I couldn't leave him alone. That he would have been in trouble if I left him. And it's like that's you putting that on Mal. Like who's to say Mal wanted all that? It's kind of what Batgirl was kind of implying. But the sad thing is, like while she's kind of like fading toward like everything about Mal, she's kind of letting slip away to a certain extent because she's trying not to lean on him, trying not to lean on anyone. But obviously that might get a little complicated with Kerrigan. But when it comes to Mal, like he finds out like basically the drawing of the stag finds its way to like his unit, and his commanding officer's like, okay, so whoever like the general's looking for this, but Mal volunteers because for him it's like, this is my way to get to you. Because like he can't any other means, because he asked like a squaller try to bribe one to be like, hey, get this to like Alina, and the dude just laughed at him. The commanding officer was like, oh, what is she to you? And it's like, I couldn't answer that. So because of that, he's in himself trying to figure it out. But obviously he goes looking for the stag, and he brings Dobrov and Mikhail because like, oh, we're going to benefit from this. Also, like, you ain't going nowhere without us, buddy. So it's going to be a dangerous mission. And I love, like, obviously Mal's following his stab because it's like, okay, whoever their alpha is pretty top tier because they're being fed even though it's like the winter and stuff like that. And I love Dobrov picks up the poop and it's like, what are you doing? It's like, oh, this is like basically magical poop, so I can make some money off it. He's like, at the very least you could wrap it up. It's like, it's dry. And then you have Mikhail being like, all right, I want half of whatever you make. And it's like, and they shake hands and everything. I'm like, I love that. It's like, but you don't know if the actual stag poop has magical properties or not. But nevertheless, they're going into Fjorden territory, and in the process they get attacked, and they end up killing all of them. Because during that whole thing, like I said, I was almost halfway expecting like Mao to be revealed to be a Grisha or something. But in that moment, like, they proceed to ultimately take everybody out. And but then like one guy's got a minigun and starts unleashing it, and Mal gets hurt, and we don't know whether like Dubrov got killed by the minigun shot or whether it was just like him getting stabbed, because like we see Mikhail getting killed and it's like, oh, make sure the other one's dead, and he ends up Mal ends up killing the Fjordans, and then but his buddies died and he's apologized because it's like because of like, oh, what I wanted to do, like you guys only came here because of me and now you're dead. And then ultimately he turns and sees the stag and he has a conversation about like, oh, the conversation about true north we had before, I told you it was home, but for me you're my true north. So just as she's having Genya get rid of the scar on her hand, like Mao's fighting to get back to her, and this is his way, and it's like he's fighting to get back to her while she's kind of silently kind of letting him go. So that's the sad circumstances of it. So by the time Mao meets up with her again, she might not be the same person. Because we also learn, like, I don't know whether or not she doesn't know the story about life, but Mao ended up getting himself locked up in a brig to be next to her. Like, because for her, Harris, she's like, oh, why are you here in the brig? He's like, oh, like, the usual. She's like, yeah, me too. And he's like, oh, look, we match. Because she didn't know, like, he attacked the quartermaster just so he could get locked up because that's what she did. So she doesn't know, like, all Mao, like, once again, it's like how Mao feels about it. She doesn't know what they are, but it's also like, right, I'm not in a position, considering the weight of everything, I can't let my feelings for Mao, like, because it's just like, oh, I'm just his little friend, like, I'm not important to him, like, yeah, we're buddies and everything, but for her, it's like, that's all it is. I'm like, she probably feels like she's adding more weight to the relationship than there is, but it's like, for Mao, it's like, no. He doesn't quite describe it yet, but he even says it, like, no, you're my true north. So, like I said, she's kind of slipping further away from him while he's trying to, like, trail after her. So that's kind of a sad situation to be, that they've set up in this episode. So I'm really interested to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. To the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.